This story began on July 7, 1937, when Japan invaded China. Some historians consider this to be the beginning of World War II in Asia. The United States assisted China under its long-standing open-door policy that was meant to prevent any dominating influence on China of any European power or of Japan. China was under the Nationalist Party rule led by Chiang Kai-shek. The Chinese Communist Party, under the leadership of Mao Zedong, had been resisting the rule of the Nationalists, but it joined forces with them to fight Japan. The Japanese surrendered on August 15, 1945. Shortly after they toasted their successful defense against the Japanese, the Communists and the Nationalists resumed their struggle for ascendancy in China. The U.S. public opinion was with the Nationalists, but U.S. President Truman took a laissez-faire approach. The U.S. made efforts to broker peace between the Nationalists and the Communists, but all failed, and U.S. Ambassador Patrick Hurley accused President Truman of not supporting Chiang Kai-shek. Despite the Truman Doctrine of 1947 that reoriented U.S. foreign policy to allow U.S. intervention in favor of its allies, Chiang Kai-shek lost to Mao Zedong, who took control of mainland China and announced the People's Republic of China on October 1, 1949. The Nationalists, under Chiang Kai-shek, escaped to the Pacific island of Taiwan to form the Republic of China.
The seeming American acquiescence in the communist victory in China caused an explosion of debate in America.
Unlike the Nationalists, the morale and fighting spirit of communist troops were high. They were winning, and they knew it.
The United States policy of let the dust settle was continued, permitting nationalist China to become an easy victim of communist propaganda, subversion, and finally, military conquest.
A greater man, a more winning personality, a stronger political sense might have made it possible for Chiang Kai-shek to continue leadership. The man was not big enough for the times. That's why I don't believe that we Americans could have done anything to save his government.
The State Department issued the China White Paper in 1949 that laid the blame of failure on nationalists' incompetence and corruption. Advocacy groups for the nationalists, collectively and somewhat pejoratively referred to as the China Lobby, warned of infiltration of the U.S. administration by communists.
One communist on the faculty of one university is one communist too many. Even if there are only one communist in the State Department, that could still be one communist too many.
Many good Americans are concerned by the way that President Truman and Governor Stevenson have both attempted to ridicule and poo-poo the communist threat within the United States.
The China Lobby and the Korean War of 1950 to 1953, in which Chinese and U.S. armed forces took opposite sides, firmly established Chinese communists as adversaries in the U.S.
By the mid-1950s, the China Lobby's crusade against communism was being questioned.
How will we defeat communism unless we know what it is, what it teaches, and why does it have such an appeal for men? Why are so many people swearing allegiance to it? And we have got to fight it with something better, not try to conceal the thinking of our own people. They are part of America, and even if they think ideas that are contrary to ours, their right to say them, their right to record them, and their right to have them at places where they're accessible to others is unquestioned, or it's not America.
Senator McCarthy's influence was dwindling.
Have you no sense of decency, sir? At long last, have you left no sense of decency?
The United States was mired in a war with Vietnam against which there was domestic resistance, an extrication from which would need dialogue with China, who was supporting North Vietnam. Also, tensions with the USSR and China were growing, and the United States saw the opportunity to use China as a counterweight to the USSR. But the most important driver of diplomacy, we think, was the reversal of two important minds. In 1965, the implacably anti-American Mao Zedong said in an interview to the American journalist Edgar Snow, "Naturally, I personally regret the forces of history that have divided and separated the American and Chinese people from virtually all communication during the past 15 years. In 1967, the equally implacable anti-communist Richard Nixon said in an article in Foreign Affairs, "We simply cannot afford to leave China forever outside the family of nations." These seismic shifts in thinking went unnoticed at the time. President Nixon, in his inaugural address in 1969, spoke indirectly to China.
We seek an open world, open to ideas, open to the exchange of goods and people, a world in which no people, great or small, will live in angry isolation.
In September 1969, Nixon's national security advisor, Dr. Henry Kissinger, issued a secret directive to support China in case of a conflict between China and the USSR. Time was now ripe for back-channel diplomacy between US and China.
There are a number of really interesting aspects when you haven't been in touch with a country for 25 years. It is amazing how technically difficult it is simply to find out where you should talk and with whom.
In 1969 and in 1970, President Nixon met with the Pakistani President Yahya Khan and asked him to help with opening a back channel with the Chinese. President Yahya agreed to do so. The message was communicated to the Chinese and they responded positively. Meanwhile, perhaps to spur back-channel diplomacy, the Chinese publicly launched the Ping Pong Initiative in April 1971 by inviting to Beijing the American ping pong team visiting Japan. Shortly thereafter, the Pakistani ambassador brought a message to the White House that reiterated Beijing's willingness to receive a special envoy. President Nixon tapped Dr. Kissinger as his envoy. This was kept secret. No U.S. government agency was made aware of the channel to Beijing.
If word got out in advance, first in the United States, those who were fiercely against any rapprochement with the Chinese and the pro-Taiwan lobby would be invading the White House and pressuring us either to call it off or constraining what we could do.
In July 1971, Dr. Kissinger arrived in Rawalpindi and met the Pakistani president. While there, Dr. Kissinger feigned illness and disappeared from the public eye for 48 hours. Enough time for a Pakistani plane to take him and his 6-member American delegation to Beijing, where they were received on July 9, 1971. They met Premier Zhao, who extended invitation to President Nixon to visit China. Dr. Kissinger returned mid-July to report to President Nixon.
Premier Zhou Enlai, on behalf of the government of the People's Republic of China, has extended an invitation to President Nixon to visit China.
On February 21, 1972, President Nixon began a week-long trip in China in which we feel the theme of the trip was that practicality wins over hostility, that geopolitical needs trump ideology. Mao expressed this in the first meeting with Nixon when he made fun of his own anti-American ideology. A joint statement, the Shanghai Communique, was issued on February 27, 1972, that stated for the first time the One China policy of the United States. The United States acknowledges that all Chinese on either side of the Taiwan Strait maintain that there is but one China and that Taiwan is part of China.
Formal diplomatic relations were established in 1979, the same year that Deng Xiaoping instituted Western-style economic reforms in China, allowing foreign investment and a modified version of market economy. China's economy, including individual enterprise and wealth, has since grown. Today, the architecture and economic thinking and even the style of clothing in China appear influenced by the West. Thus, since Kissinger's secret visit, the U.S. has made considerable cultural and economic inroads into China. Trade has flourished. But the debate has continued. The U.S. has been wary of human rights violations such as the Tiananmen Square massacre and of what some perceive as the stealing of U.S. jobs. China has been suspicious that the U.S. is trying to curb its economy and its global influence. Our point is that while adhering to their ideologies, nations should employ diplomacy to tolerate and accommodate other nations' ideologies. This is in the interest of all parties and of world peace. Between the United States and China, what is needed today is diplomacy, more than debate, a definition of common goals, so that the two countries together can lead the world to a golden age of progress, prosperity, and peace.
We came in peace for all mankind. Thank you and goodbye.